a major problem with conventional treatment is this focus on the plaques in the brain. And your work, which is similar to your mentor, Dale Bredesen, who's been on the show a couple times, you have a different outlook on the plaques. So can you talk about how you see them as being a reaction to what's happening and not the actual cause of the problem?
Yeah, so conventional medicine, the refrain for a long time was if you're not studying amyloid, you're not studying Alzheimer's. And so the research dollars got funneled into amyloid, amyloid, amyloid. And there's an entire book called How Not to Study a Disease: The Story of Alzheimer's by a gentleman named Carl Harup. And it describes how there are these elevations, like basically for marketing purposes and fundraising purposes, this Alzheimer's diagnosis grew and grew and grew in popularity, and it was associated with the amyloid plaques. But what we know is that every person, nearly, so if you take newborns to centenarians, there's only 1% to 2% of the population that doesn't have amyloid in their brain. And when you go to centenarians who have perfect cognitive function or who have declining cognitive function, some of the ones with perfect cognitive function have amyloid buildup, and some of the ones with decline of cognition who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's don't have amyloid. And so it's this really confusing situation where, of course, amyloid is associated with Alzheimer's, but just like inflammation, it begs the question, why? Why is amyloid appearing? Why is inflammation happening? What's triggering it? And that's where we go back to toxins, nutrient imbalances, infections, stressors, structural issues, and signaling. Those are the causal level things that lead to downstream amyloid as a reaction. Amyloid is antimicrobial. We know this. This is established. Amyloid is produced to protect the brain, often from things like P. gingivalis, which is associated with gingivitis, causes gingivitis in the oral cavity and increases inflammation in the cardiovascular system and then again in the brain. Also, herpes simplex 1 virus can lead to that amyloid formation. COVID is associated with cognitive decline, of course. And then many people probably listening can relate to that feeling of brain fog after COVID. And although not Alzheimer's, many people don't recover their cognitive function because of the inflammation and the cytokine storm that's associated with Alzheimer's. And then this Lyme spirochete, the Lyme spirochete is also found in the plaques and tangles associated with Alzheimer's. So we know that there's this microbial component sometimes, not all the time, not for everybody, but that's why it's a multi-pronged approach. Many people can take different paths to get to the same diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And so what we want to do is unwind that and pull the strings back, untangle what might have caused Alzheimer's for them.
We'll talk more about the research in Alzheimer's because there's some corruption there. A lot's been uncovered in the last couple of years. And
Yeah,
again, this is
so
another major problem within the conventional system.
yeah, I think we got really focused on this amyloid plaque hypothesis, which again, it's not that amyloid isn't related to Alzheimer's. Of course, it's involved. It's very much associated, but it's not causal. It's reactionary. It's a reactive process. And so I think because for the powers that be and the funding processes and the decades invested, there's sort of the sunk cost fallacy of like, okay, if we keep looking down this path, we're going to find something that's going to be helpful, and it just hasn't happened yet. Now, I think that amyloid, the monoclonal antibody therapies against amyloid, the Leqembi is the latest one. There's another one coming that hasn't been approved by the FDA yet, and then Aduhelm or aducanumab, that's actually been scrapped by Biogen because it was a higher cost and didn't work as well and had higher risk than the one that is currently on the market, Leqembi. But these are first generation drugs. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to work with the medications in the future. But right now they don't create meaningful improvement. And so we need other options. Why did we go down this path for so long? I think there's careers invested. There's a lot here. I don't think anybody intentionally messed this up. I think everybody is coming at this, dedicating their careers to helping those suffering with Alzheimer's. We know we need it, but we also kind of didn't do that null hypothesis thing where you're like, okay, can I disprove that amyloid is the cause? Could there be other causes? Am I thinking outside the box? Am I being a good scientist, making sure that we have really good data? And there was, I think you were alluding to the falsified data. There was a kind of a very influential paper that was published, and kind of as people were shifting away from the amyloid plaque hypothesis, this paper was published linking cognitive decline to amyloid plaques in mice, and it was used to justify a lot of funding afterwards. And unfortunately, it was based on junk science. And so that's pretty devastating to kind of uncover. Now, is amyloid a factor? Yes. And we need to also kind of broaden our perspective, change the paradigm a bit. This is a complex chronic disease. There's not going to be a single molecule intervention. There certainly isn't one that seems readily available at this stage. But we have other things that we can do. I think that's the primary message. Right now, there's not a pharmaceutical intervention that has meaningful benefit, but there are so many things that we can do to optimize cognitive health at any stage.
With the work of Dr. Bredesen and yourself and others doing the similar kind of work, what's the response been of conventional medicine early on, and then now over time as is becoming, more and more into the mainstream, slow but sure?
Yeah, so great question. And where I'll start is actually where we are in our research. So I published a feasibility trial. This was a very small 23 participant intervention over 6 months, where we saw that 17 of the 23 improved. They all had measurable cognitive impairment, MoCA scores between 12 and 23. So perfect is 30, 26 and above is normal. They were between 12 and 23. We took them through a 6-month intervention, and 74% of them improved, or 17 of those 23 improved. We published this in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. Now, it was not a randomized controlled trial. This was a feasibility study asking, can we do this in a cognitively declined population? And if so, do we get any meaningful impact? And the answer was yes. Now, Dr. Bredesen and his team, led by Kat Toops, they published a very similar study in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease as well in July of 2023. They took 25 participants. They were not as cognitively declined. They had MoCA scores down to 19. Again, my group had 12 to 23. So they had impairment, but they were not as severe. And they had a 9-month intervention versus ours was 6 months. But what they showed was that of their 25 participants, 84% of them improved. So this was a really exciting, right? We've seen this twice. It's been corroborated, and they are now, I think they're done with recruitment and they're just in treatment phase. But they have recruited for not blinded, you can't really blind this, but is a randomized controlled trial that's happening across 5 states in the US right now. And we're collaborating with a group as well to do another trial. And what we'll probably do is compare it to a data set that exists. Because it's very hard to control these trials because people want to be in the intervention arm and they start doing these things outside of the trial. And so it can kind of contaminate the data, but we'll get there. So we are doing a ton of research. Now, your question, what's been the response from the conventional community? To be totally honest, like I just have my head down doing my work, trying to help people get better. And I juggle the residential care facility plus my clinical practice plus research plus writing and coaching and teaching. And so I'm not really paying attention. But people keep showing up and wanting to engage in this and wanting to do this and what I hear from them is that in the neurology office, they're told there's nothing they can do. And so I think that patients are asking for solutions and for options, and they're willing to do the work. And so my hope is that that us getting together, having this conversation, my book coming out, this will start to change the narrative around what's possible. Now, just a few weeks ago, CNN, this did kind of go mainstream because Sanjay Gupta did a docuseries on people reversing their dementia symptoms and Alzheimer's symptoms. And Richard Isaacson, who's on the East Coast, he now works with Peter Attia. He has done a lot of work on prevention of dementia. And one of these patients was his. And then there were some people from the West Coast, Dean Ornish's patients. He's at UCSF and they do much more plant-based work. So they are plant-based diet work. So they're not animal protein keto fans. But I'm here to reassure you, we see people reverse their cognitive decline symptoms, reverse their diagnosed Alzheimer's sometimes with keto and using animal proteins in their diet. So you don't have to go vegan in order to get better.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're gonna wanna head over here and catch the full episode. I'll see you over there.
Conventional medicine, the refrain for a long time was if you're not studying amyloid, you're not studying Alzheimer's. The research dollars got funneled into amyloid. It's not that amyloid isn't related to Alzheimer's. It's very much associated, but it's not.